Okay. All right. Oh, hi. Wow, nice. Very lovely. So this is a story for I'm sorry, yes. All right. Well, so this is this novel is everyone should make the effort. That's right. They're all descendants. They're all. Okay, let me see. Oh, good. All right. So you have all the from last week. There will be a okay. Oh, right, because she's still away. Oh, where is she? She told me in March. Oh, okay. So here, so let me give you also the document. Here, so this is me, or this is one of the. You only need the document. I need the shot. Okay. You know, it's two factors. Okay. So you're on seven. Okay, wait, let me. I don't know. And this, I'll get to it eventually, but I'm not playing. I'm going to finish it. Okay. So are we all here? I think I know where Rabbi Google is. But it is the cost. So let me get my seat in here also. I'll see one's out. Yeah. All right. So I did obviously some further research because everybody has a slightly different interpretation of what they're about. But we had begun last week talking about the terrible massacres that occurred in 1648-49, but really they went even beyond into 1650, 51, 52. And it's affecting primarily Jews in the Ukraine, but it will spread to the Jews in Lithuania as well. So I'm trying to think what we were up to. Oh, and we did talk about the fact. So the leader of this revolt, his name is Bogdan Khmelnytsky. He came from the lower nobility. We talked about and we talked about the tremendous animosity against the Poles because they were the owners of the land, and everybody else, we're talking about primarily the Ukrainians were serfs and worked for them, and this resentment was building. So it's an economic revolt, but it's also a religious revolt because the Poles are Roman Catholics and Ukrainians are, I presume they're more like Russian Orthodox. They actually, Ukrainians, it's so funny because nowadays, everyone up in arms, that Ukraine needs its independence, but the Ukrainians have really traditionally been aligned with Russia because their language is very much, and they're right on the border with Russia. And you see, we also, at a certain point, made a treaty with the Muscovite kingdom. It's not quite called Russia then, it's called the Muscovite. So it was centered around Moscow. So you could just see that their alliance, that's why Putin's claim, especially to that eastern, southeastern area, why he invaded Crimea. How come we didn't put up a fuss when he invaded Crimea? I mean, everybody just rolled over. So now he's talking about that Donetsk region, apparently it's the industrial heartland of Ukraine. So Ukraine doesn't want to lose that area. First of all, it's all been demolished, at this point. So I don't know what to go back to. The infrastructure is just totally, been bombarded. But okay, so going back though into the mid-17th century, the Cossacks originally, they were actually organized by the Poles as like units, to try to keep the kebabs, on the peasantry. But, this Khmelnytsky is going to utilize them to turn against the Poles. And unfortunately, the Jews are always caught in this horrible bind because we were the overseers of the Polish landlords. Polish landlords sometimes lived there. Half the time they were back in Warsaw. Some of them even went to Paris. They had homes there. So they left all the nitty-gritty business to the Jew. And he was responsible for collecting taxes. Nobody likes a tax collector. And of course, Jews were anything. So it's as you see, it's a political thing, an economic, it's a religious, revolt that's going to take place. And again, it's anger, it's tremendous hostility that grows and grows over years, and it's now going to break out. Now, Khmelnytsky also made an alliance with the Tatars, who are from the Crimea. I don't think you see a picture of him. I unfortunately don't have it, but I have seen a painting. He had this like walrus mustache, huge mustache, right? That curved out, popular, in those days. And he obviously was a very charismatic individual. He was well educated. We had mentioned last time he was educated actually by the Jesuits, although that's Catholic Church, he obviously was Russian Orthodox. And when both the Cossacks and the Tatars, started attacking, they were trying to be against the noblemen, but the Jew was the most readily apparent enemy. So that's why the attack became against the Jews in Ukraine, and they slaughtered indiscriminately men, women, children. The Tatars, though, actually, they said sometimes the Jews prefer to fall into the Tatars' hands because they were interested in making money. And what they would do is they would sell these Jews. They would capture them as captives and just murder them, and then he would sell them to the Jews in the Ottoman Empire, who were more than happy to pidyon shivuya, so they were there for a nice little money making thing. They didn't have all these animosities. So I think I've given you like an overall picture of what's going on in the country at that time. So I'm on page 3. Let's see, we were going back and forth. So yes, is that the one I'm in the middle of? Okay. All right. Let's see. And you have your maps. You can just look at Ukraine. So you could, they're making Poland look quite small there, actually. First of all, it was the kingdom of Poland, Lithuania. It was a very, very large kingdom. And the eastern portion of this kingdom was Ukraine, right? It's like southeastern. And then Poland, it was this huge commonwealth that existed, in those days. All right, let me just make sure I got all this. All right. I remember I was going back and forth because No, that's what I'm saying. This, I know, but it's misleading. I think I got it from Rabbi Wine's book. Just think it's a huge Poland, Lithuania Commonwealth, all right? And the eastern portion, southeastern portion is Ukraine, but they're all part of this one great kingdom. And then on the other side of Ukraine is Russia, right? That's why I put in some of the modern day, why he's been invading there. And let's see. So I'm on two things. The one that says the Cossack revolt, I believe I'm on page 2 of that. But there's another one called the Jews of mid-17th century Poland, and they're on page 3. So I'm going back and forth because, different sources. Even now, I told you I did some further readings, and I get even some more information, as time goes on. You have to turn the phone off or put it to mute. Put it to mute. I don't usually turn mine off, but I turn off the ringer so it doesn't disturb me. Okay. Where did I want to start with? Okay, so let's do the Cossack Revolt, page 2. Okay. And we're going to, so again, those awful massacres of 1648-49 have occurred. Now what's going to happen? In the years, so you're with me? So it's page 2 of the Cossack Revolt. In the year 1651, the Poles finally defeated Khmelnytsky. It took them a long time to get themselves organized. I remember we had started off actually a discussion that Poland, Lithuania was divided up again into various regions and areas. The king is weak, purposefully. The noblemen want him to be weak. But as a result, they're fractured. So it took them all a while till they could organize an army that could, with of sufficient strength to fight against the Cossacks. And don't forget, the Cossacks had been trained to be a military force in the Ukrainian area. In the year 1651, the Poles finally defeated Khmelnytsky, but this did not end the unrest. Rather, it hastened the demise of the Polish Republic, all right, because it's just going to be downhill here on. The Cossacks formed an alliance with Russia. We know I had mentioned that to you. Poland's old enemy, and began a 13-year war. At one place, it's almost 10 years it lasted, which would ultimately result in the dismemberment of Poland a century later. It's actually the late 1700s, 1790s, right? Where Poland will really just disappear as an independent country. All right, but again, we're talking about, at the very end of the 18th century. In 1654-55, so this is a little later point, the Cossacks, together with their Russian allies, mounted an attack on Lithuania. All right, and at this point, there was a sizable Jewish community already. They not as large as it's going to become later, in the century, early 20th century. They then began to butcher the Jewish population with great cruelty. I mean, I didn't write down any of this, but really, they were pretty vicious and horrible, dismembered. Yeah, it was really nauseating. When the Cossack hordes reached Vilna, I think I had done this last time, but okay, but this way we'll hold it together. The center of Jewish life in Lithuania, Duke Radziwill. Remember, I know, I talked about it. Remember Jackie Kennedy's sister, Lee Radziwill? So she's a descendant, right? This Duke fled, well, her husband, I mean, she's an American, fled together with his army, leaving the city defenseless. On the 23rd of Tammuz, 1655, almost the entire Jewish community fled the town. Those who had prepared horses and wagons for themselves loaded them with their wives and children. It reminds me, in France, when the Nazis invaded in 1940, how they all packed their belongings. The roads were just clogged. And they were going further south, which then became the Vichy government. It wasn't just Jews, I mean, Frenchmen in general, were going southward. And I guess so. Here, the Jews are the ones fleeing. I can't imagine. I'm sure there were other Lithuanians who also. Those who prepared right horses and wagons, they loaded them with their wives and children. Those that had not prepared fled on foot, taking their belongings and small children on their shoulders. The Cossacks, again, I told you the numbers are not accurate, but let's just read it as I had found it. Cossacks killed 45,000 people on this day and burned Vilna for 17 days. The numbers here, there later on I'll come to a spot where it talks about like 100,000 Jews were murdered, right, in these Khmelnytsky revolts. But more modern day historians, first of all, they don't feel that there were that many Jews living there in this time period. That would have accounted for if you more people, half people, if you could say 100,000 of them were murdered. So they feel it was maybe more in the 100,000s, perhaps, there were Jews living already in this time period. So their estimate is more like around 15,000. Okay, every soul is an important person, so no matter what. But, it's not quite to the magnitude that earlier scholars seem to think. Now, here, let's just complicate everything a bit. Now, you might have learned this when you did general history. I don't remember. Meanwhile, Sweden, under Charles X, taking advantage of Poland's weakness, swooped into the embattled country from the north. And you know that Sweden had invaded Russia. Do you remember ever learning that when you did world history? Okay. And conquered significant portions of it. Especially Sweden was in St. Petersburg, the area. Sweden. Yeah, he was a Swede. The fleeing Jews suffered heavily from this further escalation of warfare. Here they're being attacked with these hordes of Cossacks coming from Ukraine. And now the Swedes said, well, let's take advantage of this. Let's, get more territory for ourselves. And they're coming. Now, they're not strictly anti-Jewish. It's just, obviously, the Jews living there are going to be caught up in this invasion. The Swedish army then imposed heavy taxes upon the unfortunate Jews. And thus entered a glorious era for Polish Jewry. It would be a long time until the Jews would reestablish themselves and their communal organizations in Greater Poland. So we're not going to hear so much. I mean, believe you me, their Jewish life did continue, but a lot of Jews are going to actually flee back to Germany and other areas where they feel that, things have calmed down there. Don't forget, why had they left Germany? Particularly because from 1618 to 1648 was what was called the 30 Years' War, and economic conditions were terrible for the Jews. Plus, Germany at that point is fractured into many, many different principalities, and the Jews were constantly being thrown out from this one to that one, and then all sorts of restrictive laws. So that's why they all started migrating eastward into Poland and Lithuania. So I would say from the 15th through the mid-17th century, Poland was viewed as a haven for Jews, and life was good for them there, and they did well. And it's, how awful, and now everything's turned against them. So, many of them will flee back more into Western Europe, all right, or other parts, maybe it's not quite yet Austria-Hungary, but eventually they're going to go southward, right? That's how the Jews will be in Romania and Hungary. That's going to come, at a bit later date. All right. Let me, before I finish up this last paragraph, so let's turn now to the one that said the Jews of mid-17th century Poland. And I'm on page 3. So some of it will be repetition, but some of it will be some additional information. Okay. Right. And again, you can always look at that. So I actually listened to a lecture online about Khmelnytsky. And that man was pronouncing that river, who I wasn't sure how to pronounce. He was driving the Dnieper River. Okay. And that's in the Ukraine, a major river there. Okay, so let's start with so it's three. So start with the first main paragraph on page 3 there. All right. Poland's difficulties did not end with the retirement of Khmelnytsky across the Dnieper. All right. Because what happened was the invading Polish forces, once they got themselves organized, they obviously pushed them back. So we had to go further east, southward. The weakness of the country attracted other conquerors. We just talked about it, but we'll get a little more information here. Those provinces which had escaped the Khmelnytsky horrors because they did not lie in the path of his march. So that's why now we're talking about northern Poland, which is Lithuania, to have their turn of terror and martyrdom. Lithuania was also invaded by the Russians, so that the rising Jewish community of Vilna was scattered. And the Swedes, on the other hand, attacked from the north, although they acted in a more civilized nature. They even protected the Jews against certain gangster elements within the Polish population. But, of course, no problem taxing them. Remember, we had already learned that, okay? The result that was then, some years later, peace was reestablished. The Poles accused the Jews of having been in league with Sweden. We're always caught in the middle. Can't escape from it. The pogroms, or these attacks, I mentioned last time, I feel that that word pogrom refers to, in particular, to the 19th, 20th century attacks upon Jews. I think that's where that word comes from. All right, so with these attacks, these pogroms from which they had been saved by the Swedes, were now unleashed upon them by the Poles, their own neighbors. So here's it. The next chapter talks about 10 years. Here's 10. When after 10 years of war, Poland had expelled all its enemies, it had an opportunity to take stock of its losses and make sure that its enemies would not again be attracted by its weakness. The Poles, however, did not learn from their period of national horror. They again fell back into internal disunity, which was to cost Poland its life a century later. We talked about, right? There's no strong monarchy, right? There are actually vast landholdings, the upper nobility, vast tracts of land. And that's when they hired the Jews to be their overseers. There are people what we call lesser nobility, but they really don't have any. All right, I mean, and the parliament's called the Diet. But remember, I told you they had this ridiculous law that if one person opposed a law, that was up for consideration, that's it. No, nobody had to follow it. I mean, they didn't believe in majority rule, just like third. Any case, now back into internal disunity. At the end of these 10 years, the Jewish community of Poland reestablished itself, but the Jews never regained their prior strength. Okay, so here I told you, I feel that this is incorrect. We're now 17th century, the middle of the 17th century, right? So it's after 1648, 40. No, right? Hey, that's what we've been talking about. Because they wrote the Taikach means 1648, and Tat refers to 49. But you saw that the attacks upon the Jews considered way beyond that, into the 1650s. So here we're saying 100,000. It could be just 15,000, whatever. As I say, each soul is an important person, regardless. And the rest were left impoverished. So we're going to talk later on, more than 19th century, living in the steppes, and they were poor as poor can be. Up until then, up until this mid-17th century, but, I mean, they weren't all wealthy at all, but, they were leading, let's say, lower middle class lives, the majority. But after this, it was going to be sort of poor. Not as much. We will discuss certain Rabbanim, right? I always like to go back and forth. I like to tell you the history of a time period, and then we go back and we learn about the great Rabbanim who come from that time. All right. Now the next we talk about the Council of Forebears. That's about so this is how the Jews, Poland, Lithuania organized themselves. They had this very, large organization. organization that it would be like the go-between normally between the Jews, the government. They were responsible for the taxes, handing them over to the government. I'm not sure how exactly how these taxes work. If the king was so weak, well, he obviously got a certain percentage of this money, but probably a lot of these taxes were just going to the noblemen who ruled in that region, where a group of Jews live. The Council for Lands could hardly raise the taxes imposed by the government, let alone help the homeless and starving to resume a normal life. The vast number of orphans who had to be fed by the various communities alone presented an appalling task. I always found it interesting that, throughout Europe and then in America, that there were these orphanages years ago. We don't have them nowadays, but I guess so many, unfortunately, people had lost their parents and there were no relatives around to help take these children in. So I know from my son Shalom in England that in Bevis Marks it was a whole complex. Right now, it's just still they sold all the other property around it, but there was an orphanage there also. So I guess reflects on the poverty of the times. I mean, right? Yes, certainly in America. I know that I know a man in Rochester told me he and his brother, the father had died or abandoned them, who knows, and the mother just could not feed these children, and she put them in an orphanage. I'm trying to think of his name. He used to help me out in the library. He passed away a number of years. He has a wife and a daughter who lived at home. So they didn't go to Beth Shalom. So it must be somebody. Yeah, I think so. But I cannot relate. It was this lovely, lovely man. I just remember that. Yeah, yeah. But I think the mother eventually reclaimed him and his brother, but there was a period of time she literally could not take care of. The council, we're talking about the Bat Arba Haratzot, had to borrow money in the name of the Jewish community for the next 100 years. Large numbers. Remember, we're talking about now there's going to be a migration going westward. All was going eastward. They sought refuge in Western lands, going as far as Holland, England, and the Alsace region of France. So essentially, well, I have to study more about the history of French Jewry. The Jews were officially expelled from France in 1394. But I certainly know by the time of the French Revolution and Napoleon, there are Jews living there. So at some point, they started filtering back, and I guess they were accepted and allowed, to live there. They probably served, again, a useful economic purpose. So they allowed them in. I don't know that there was any official abrogation of the expulsion law. Look, in Spain, it took them 500 years to annul that expulsion. What's that? Yes. It'll be interesting. We'll be coming to the 19th century and learn about him. Gloom and a sense of hopelessness weighed down the next generation in Poland, exceeding similar feelings of the German Jews of that age who had just gone through the 30 Years' War. But we're affecting now a much larger population because so many Jews are currently living now in this Poland, Lithuania Commonwealth. So after these horrible, massacres, it's going to take them a long time. I mean, they have to economically, they have to improve this. So socially, they're also somewhat fragmented. Their family life, everything's turned to shambles. And it won't be until more into that 19th century, that Polish Jewry will again return, to a high point. And most of us, right, probably come from that area of the world. The study of Kabbalah and its practical applications is taught by the Arizal, right? Ari is from Sfat, Israel, seized hold of the Jewish mind, particularly in Southeastern Europe and Poland. All right, we'll learn more about that, this business of study of Kabbalah. Let me just go back to finish up the end of the one that's called the Cossack Revolt. So I'll do that last paragraph. You talked to me also about learning, what was going on. The Cossack revolt, with its attendant massacre of the Jewish masses and destruction of entire Jewish communities, had a deep impact on the course of Torah scholarship. The old, orderly, and structured Kehillah and its institutions were shattered. So even at Vad Arba, so it's not, running to its full capacity at this time anymore. The big and prestigious yeshivot were closed, and learning began to assume an individualistic character. Young men would learn in the local Beit HaMedrash, largely unaided, and yeshivot, where they existed, were small study groups assembled by the local Rav or another scholar. Nevertheless, Torah scholarship somehow managed to survive. It does, right? Somehow, under the most terrible conditions, right? We still have this love of Torah. Great Torah personalities emerged, but few mentors are mentioned in their work. So it was more through their own independent study of what had come before, that fostered their imagination and their writing, It would not be until the 19th century, right? The yeshivot again began to flourish, first in Lithuania and later in Poland. So an overall picture of what it was like, and this terrible decline is going to set in for Poland. I have on my mother's side great grandparents who came to America. It was already the 19th century, but earlier, before that huge migration from the 1880s to 1920s. And they came at the beginning of 1870. And I said, what the heck? And they were Polish Jews. But I guess times were very bad in Poland, and they came to America. So I remember people used to say when I told them, that on my side, oh, you're a real Yankee. That really makes myself back. Yeah. No, 19th century, end of the 19th, early 20th century. Yeah, not this period. I don't think there are any plays on Chmelnytsky that I'm aware of. I never heard of anybody writing. Let me just tell you a little bit of whatever happened to Chmelnytsky. So that 1648 is also a demarcation date for Poland. It was the end of their golden age, because they're going to go into a terrible state of decline. Okay, let me see what else. Right, and I told you many Jews are not going to flee westward beyond the Vistula River. 1654 was the pact that Khmelnytsky did with the Muscovites, right? Align himself with Russians. And actually, at that point, central Ukraine was put under Russian protection. So again, I'm just trying to say we could kind of link it in with what's going on today. So that's why Russia feels this affinity, right, to Ukraine, and what they feel that really belongs to them. Okay. So he was married to Chmelnytsky. He had 3 daughters, 2 sons. I think he might have had 2 wives. One might have died younger, and the second wife. Okay. His area of, actually, it's interesting, where he came from, it's called Ruthenia, and that's also referred to as Little Russia. So, again, you can see that alliance between that part of Ukraine and Russia. Very, very close conditions. I don't know where. I do remember reading this. Oh, wait, this is my next sheet. I write little notes in addition. So I don't know if you ever heard of the memoirs of Bukala Pamela. So I guess she was one of these people who, had to flee in the Chmelnytsky massacre. So I guess she wrote about that. And Chmelnytsky is considered this national hero by Ukrainians. Should you go to Kiev? Of course, I never go there. There is this huge statue of Chmelnytsky on a horse. It's a huge thing, in Kiev, because they hero, of theirs. I mean, I don't think he was trying to. Did you want to gain independence? was just like lashing out, against the Poles and Jews. And I just found this out recently, again, because I was listening to this lecture. So I told you there's this statue on a horse. It says under the hooves of the horse, there's fallen people, and one represents the Poles. All right, so needless to say, there was an extremely stabilized force, and totally, as I say, it's going to lead to a terrible decline of Poland within the point. If I wrote this, I remember reading it. So he does. He died. His years were. He dies actually in 1657. So remember, 1654 is when he made that treaty with Russia. He dies just a few years after that, and I had read that he actually had a brain aneurysm. That's what killed him after he had massacred so many other people. So, okay, so let's put away these sheets and take out the Shoprite's keywords. And you can imagine how downtrodden the Jews, right, of Poland was made. Actually, throughout Europe, I mean, this was such a massive attack upon them, like so almost to them, like almost out of the blue, And why are they doing homes demolished, their whole lives turned upside down. So, when things are very low, you're always looking somehow for a savior who's going to come, It's interesting, after the Holocaust, I don't think, well, maybe at that point, so many Jews just turned away from Yiddishkeit in any case. Were we waiting for some savior to come? I don't know. But in any case, I guess it just totally kind of demolished that. Although Hasidic movement had, risen after the Holocaust, and maybe, partially that. In any case, so I wrote you here. I have his dates here. He's born in 1626 and he died in 1670. He's 50 years old. This guy, unfortunately, was really mentally ill. So I read his lectures upon it. They feel that he must have been bipolar, like a manic depressive, because he went through periods of time of like great elation, filled with excitement and making plans, and then he would sink very low down. So that is what a bipolar does. That's what they don't. I don't know anybody with it, but when they're in their manic phase of it, and they think everything's just wonderful, life is fantastic, they don't take their medication, but they need it. They need to always take that medicine, whether they're down in the dumps or they're on. I guess it helps bring them to more even keel. But of course, no medication like that. All right. So let's learn about him. He's not a Polish Jew. He's not Ukrainian. He comes from Turkey, right, from the Ottoman Empire. So let's learn about him. So first, a general statement, and then more particular. Many Jews in 17th century Poland looked for the coming of the Mashiach in that generation. Kabbalists had calculated that the Messianic year would be 1648. Throughout history, we're going to come across the people, you pick a certain date and, the coming of the end, even on Christian groups, right? They have, yes, right. Very dangerous, very dangerous. All the misfortunes which came upon Central and Eastern Europe in that period served as so much proof that the Messianic era was approaching. Why? You think things are terrible? Because, next sentence, it was foretold that the Mashiach's arrival was to be preceded by war and pestilence. It's like the war Gog and Magog, all right? And that then the Mashiach, all right. Ready to be deluded, many Jews fell victim to false messiahs at that time. And certainly, those who were with me when I talked about who they were still from Spain and Italy, that David Harvard-Vain and Shlomo Molcho, it's the same thing. That the Jews actually believe that these people, I guess if you want so much that someone will come and save you from terrible state of affairs. So, no, that's what I was saying. No. Oh, no. I guess we look askance upon that. Although with the Hasidic movement, especially about the Lubavitch, who have done fantastic work, but they thought the Rebbe is the Mashiach. Okay, so no, no, he had no. Obviously, the nephew there, not good vibes between the two of them. In any case, it would never have. Right, had him become the Rebbe. Any case, so as I said, the Jews are in a state of great despair at this time. Again, they're very impoverished, right? Some of them have been forced to actually leave their homes, move elsewhere. They've lost so many family members. So a period of great upheaval going on. All right. Now, this is interesting. On the 9th of Av, in the year 1626, in the city of Smyrna, Smyrna is today called Izmir, I-Z-M-I-R, Izmir, Turkey. A son was born to a family of Spanish Judeo origin. In other words, from 1492, when the Jews were expelled, so his great-great-grandparents made the decision to move eastward into the Ottoman Empire. All right. And he was named Shabtai Tzvi. Very nice. The date is significant, for according to Jewish legend, the Mashiach's birth is connected with the date of the destruction of the temple. I don't know if you had ever heard this. I never had a friend, which had a girl, in any case, but she was born on Tisha B'Av. Whenever Hashem has a new master plan, it's going to happen. But somehow this date was floating around in Jewish lore that the Mashiach was born on this date. Again, because we're commemorating the terrible destruction. So again, a savior will come out of that year, that date. The boy was exceptionally bright, and he received the usual Jewish education. And several sources have emphasized that he was an excellent student, right? Quite bright. But emerging from boyhood, he found less interest in Talmudic study and engaged more and more in the Zohar and other Kabbalistic commentaries. I'm trying to understand, because I come from, descendants from Lithuania. Those are Nadim, and boy, are they against, against, and they're against the study of Kabbalah. I mean, but vehemently so. But I think it's probably coming from this, because here's somebody who's being influenced by that, and then false messiah as a result. And he was also handsome. And again, I've seen this in a few sources, so I haven't. The only picture that I saw of him was too small for me to say that he was good looking. But I guess this is what has come down. That he was a very good looking guy. All right. And he was obviously a born leader. You do know that there are certain individuals, they just have that quality about them, right? They can lead people. Before long, a group of young men crowded around him, and he secretly initiated them into the mystery of Kabbalah. He looked upon himself, and he was looked upon by others as destined for great things. He considered his thoughts to be too deep and his life too pure for marriage. So again, in another source, I read that he actually was married twice, but it was never consummated. So I'm telling you, a very bizarre individual. Okay. But I still cannot fathom that was why so many people flocked to him. I just can't. I guess if you're sunk so low in conditions that so horrible, and somebody's talking to you about the glorious day that's about to come, and go back to Israel, I don't know. It's beyond me. All right. Finally, in the year 1648, okay, and again, that's so everything is sort of connected with the Khmelnytsky era. He took a bold step, which even though he's not there, he's not in Poland, he's in Turkey, which he had long been plotting. What did he want to do? Which was to mark him as being on terms of unusual familiarity with God. What does he do? He goes into the shul, standing before the Torah in the synagogue. Shabtai Tzvi announces the name of God as it is written to you because you don't believe that. You know, the Yud Vav Kei, pronouncing it, as those witnesses call themselves, right? Not as usually spoken by Jews. Okay, counting on the widespread expectations of that year 1648. Remember, because you know, in certain circles, they can say, well, the Mashiach is going to come in the year 1648. And Mashiach, Nachmaninsky, you know, attacked them all, murdered them. He meant this act to set, you know, this business that he could now, right in front of the Torah, God's name. He meant this act to symbolize the beginning of his messianic career. So again, he's obviously in one of his main stages, and he thinks that he is the Mashiach. Shocked by his blasphemy, the leaders of the Smyrna community excommunicated him. So we don't want this nutcase here. I don't know what the fuck he's trying to do. Get out of here. And he was compelled to go elsewhere. However, far from discrediting him, his bold actions and his messianic claims, supported by evidence from Kabbalistic writings, won for him adherents wherever he went. Again, I'm certainly not a student of Kabbalah at all. It's kind of ridiculous, but you know, there are people who are great proponents, you know, of it. I think the main thing is, you know, that there's different spheres, and we have to collect all these fragments, you know, that have been dispersed. And this will bring us eventually back to God, and then the Mashiach, whatever. Again, I'm only saying a very general statement about what Kabbalah is. Most of I will finish with this next paragraph. Most of Shabtai Tzvi's followers were honest, anxious to believe in him. Some were no doubt adventurers, ready to take advantage of the credulity, right? You know, the belief of it. You know, this man wants to bounce something of the masses. Shabtai Tzvi lost no opportunity to advance his cause. In the presence of learned men, Kabbalists in Salonika, okay, Salonika, that's Greece. So he's leaving Turkey. He's now going to go to Greece. Salonika is actually Thessaloniki, you know, if you're right, if you want to look it up. And there was a really most beautiful, thriving Jewish community there of mostly Sephardic Jews, and they were all, you know, they were sent out. I'm sure. So today there is, I think, still a very tiny Jewish community there, but you know, but it was at one point, right into obviously the middle of that 20th century. It was a very large, vibrant. There were good merchants. They were very, you know, they were very well known. He suddenly produced a marriage. Now, because this is the next idiot thing he does. He suddenly produced a marriage canopy and a scroll of the Torah. And he went through a marriage ceremony with the Torah as his bride. Now, I don't know why they're tolerating this guy. I mean, so the people in Turkey got rid of him, you know. His audience was more shocked than impressed. And he was forced to wander further. But he did stay for a while there. For years, he moved from place to place, looking for adherents, but biding his time till the next opportunity arose. So now he goes to Cairo, Egypt. And again, all these places have these large Sephardic communities, you know, where Jews had settled, like after the expulsion. And there he found an environment fitted for his purpose. So, you know what, I'm going to, well, I could read a little bit into the next paragraph and then stop, and we'll do the rest. In Cairo, the wealthy Raphael Yosef Halevi supported in his home a number of pious followers of the teachings of the Arizal. Shabtai Tzvi, you know, the Zal means Zichrono Livracha, but he's always referred to as Arizal. I could tell home just the Ari, but he's usually has the Zal part after his name. Shabtai Tzvi found a place among them and soon showed his personal Kabbalistic superiority over them all. Remember, he's extraordinarily bright. And he did receive a good education, but then he devoted himself like almost like exclusively to studying Kabbalah and spreading his thoughts, you know, various, you know, interpretation, you know, Jewish lore, Now, so now he's going. Like he comes from Turkey, he goes to Greece, and from Greece he goes to Egypt. So I'll just do a little bit more. When Halevi sent a mission to Yerushalayim for the purpose of distributing charity, that's eventually called the Chalukah. Money would be assembled somewhere in Europe, and again, the Jews were in poverty stricken. Those who are still living in Israel. He picked Shafai Tzvi. He's going to be his emissary. To the starving mystics of the holy city, he appeared as literally a divine messenger. Well, he's bringing them funds to go on living. So, of course, we're supremely grateful, And again, many of them were Kabbalists. The Jews at this point in Israel are primarily living either in the city of Tzfat or they are living now in Jerusalem. But again, poor as poor can be. At this point in his life, Shafai Tzvi. So let's pause here because we'll talk about this next guy, next time, and we'll see again how his pronouncement that he is a Mashiach is going to gain widespread, adherence, among the Jews living in Europe. And it's not going to be just those Polish or even Jews from the Ukraine area. It's going to spread into Western Europe. I don't know how gullible they could have been. You're right. Okay, everybody be well. Well, there already are living Jews of Vienna. There are definitely. But then for a while they were expelled, so they weren't living there. Thank you. What? Are they doing? Away? Okay. And tell Rosie I expect her next week. Oh, it's shooting fun. Yeah. Let me just